Bismillahirrahmanirrahim wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi tahirin wa salamu taslima. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. In our last lesson, we began to discuss some of the attributes of Allah, the Sifa. And today we are going to be talking in our 11th lesson more about the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So last time we discussed the negative and positive attributes, the sifat al-thubutiyah and sifat as-sifat al-salabiyah. So salabiyah and thubutiyah. And these were the attributes of Jamaliyah, beauty, and the attributes of Jalaliyah, the attributes of exaltedness, glory. So we said those negative attributes are those which that we negate from Allah because they're imperfect, like zulm. Zulm means oppression, or compositeness, compoundness, having parts. We negate that from Allah because that means that Allah would be imperfect if He needed these parts or if He did zulm. So, and those positive attributes are those attributes which are attributes of perfection, such as justice, power, and etc. So today we wanted to talk about the attributes of essence and the attributes of action. So the attributes of essence and the attributes of action. In dividing the attributes into attributes of essence and attributes of action, there are two terminologies and two views involved. First, when we are abstracting an attribute from the divine essence, or describing the divine essence with that attribute, whenever there's conception, tasawwur, whenever there's tasawwur means a concept, means the picture or idea of a thing in the mind, a concept, just a pure concept without any judgment on it. So whenever we have a tasawwur in the mind, a concept in the mind of the essence. So whenever we have the tasawwur of the essence, a concept of the essence in the mind is sufficient, and there is no need for any conception of God's agency, fa'aliyah, action. The said attribute is an attribute of essence. So whenever we have an idea, when we think of God's attributes, and we have in our mind that we don't need to have any idea about an action being involved with this, or God's agency being involved in this, then we say this is an attribute of essence, such as power, qudrah, or knowledge, ilm. So these are essential attributes, such as hayya, life, al-hayy, the ever-living, irada, will, murid, the willing, ilm, knowledge, al-alim, the knowing, qudrah, power, al-qadir, the all-powerful. And whenever the conception of God's agency is needed, whenever we think of His action in it, when we abstract the idea of an attribute, so when we think of the attribute, that attribute is called an attribute of action, a fa'aliyah, or the agency attribute. An example is khalq. When we think of khalq, creation, we think of al-khaliq, the creator. Or rizq. When we think of rizq, sustenance, we think of al-razik, the giver of sustenance. When we think of amata, death, we think of al-mumayyit, Al-Mumayyit, the one who the life taker, the one who gives death. And when we think of Al-Ahya, living, we think of Al-Muhyayi, Al-Muhayyi, the life giver. When we think of Makfira, forgiveness, we think of Al-Ghafir, the forgiver. When we think of Intiqam, vengeance, we think of Al-Muntaqim, the avenger, etc. So these, when we think of the action of doing it, the agency involved, they are called attributes of action. And when we think of it and there is no involvement of the action, then it's called essential essence attributes, sifato dhati and sifato fe'eliya. So whenever the opposite or the reverse of an attribute can be attributed to God, it is called the attribute of action. And whenever the opposite or reverse of an attribute cannot be attributed to God, it is called an attribute of essence. Therefore, power, knowledge, and life are among the attributes of the divine essence. Because God cannot be described with the opposites of these attributes, as their opposites denote existential deficiency, such as knowledge. The opposite of knowledge is ignorance. God cannot be both knowing and ignorant. God is perfect. Ignorance is imperfection. Therefore, knowledge is a perfection. Therefore, God has knowledge and cannot have ignorance. But will, when we talk about irada, will is not one of the attributes of essence, because when describing God with its opposite is not possible. For instance, it can be said that God does not will any form of injustice towards his servants. Wa ma Allahu yuridu dhumman lil ibad, and Allah does not want any wrong to his servants. So on this basis, justice, adl, is one of the attributes of the divine essence, but according to the first terminology, it is one of the attributes of action. So one of the two stated terminologies, the first is more popular and prevalent in the books of falsafa, theology, and kalam. And in Al-Kafi, Sheikh Al-Kulaini has adopted the second terminology. So there's traditions which have regarded irada as one of the attributes of the divine action, have been interpreted on this basis. So this is all we want to talk about regarding the attributes here. There's other attributes like the real and relative attributes. Maybe we'll save these for our next semester, inshallah. And the transmitted attributes and some issues about the names of Allah. Inshallah, we can go more in depth in our next semester on these. But I wanted to... So, what about seeing God? God has all perfect attributes. He does not lack any perfection, because when someone lacks a perfection, it is considered an imperfection. So some people claim that God has a body. They said God has a body, a jism. They are called mujassima. These people are called mujassima, the people who claim that God has a body. And there's another group among that fit into this category called karamiya. They believe that you can see God by the eyes. The Ash'ara school of theology say that God is not jism, but you can see him by the eyes. They sought for a clever answer, so they differed. They said they don't mean by seeing God formation by picture in the eye or the radiation from the eye. they mean that knowledge that one has. Because, they believe that the radiation comes from the eyes and sees a thing. And some others from them said that seeing God means that on the day of judgment, that God will be revealed to his believing servants, like the complete moon. So in Bab al-Hadi al-Ashar, a famous book that we use for theology, written by Allama Hilli. Allama Hilli was Ayatollah Allama before the age of Bulugh, and this is why you have these. One of the criteria for being marja taqlid is that you have to be of the age over the age of Bulugh. So if someone were like Allama Hilli per se, and they were Ayatollah before, they'd have to wait after they were Bulugh for people to do taqlid to them. So if they mean we are going, so anyways, before I carry on, Allama Hilli, he wrote this book Bab al-Hadi al-Ashar, and then later on, a great scholar called Fadl ibn Miqdad commented on it. And Fadl ibn Miqdad, in his commentary on this, says that if they mean we are going to have a complete presence, then we agree. If they mean on the Day of Judgment that God's presence will be there, that we'll realize this, then that's okay, we agree. Because all mu'arif, all things that are knowing on the Qiyamah, the Day of Judgment, become self-evident. This is called perfect knowledge. But if they mean something else, then it becomes a matter of seeing. Then there is a problem, and we cannot agree with them. Because seeing God, according to intellect, is batil. Batil says you cannot see God. God has no limits, no parts. And for something to be seen, it would have to be limited. Because every visible thing has a direction. Either it is in front of you, or it is like being in front of you, and God does not have a direction. So he is not visible. So God is not visible. If it has to be in front of you, it has to be a jism. If it has to be a physical object. To think God as jism and limit him to a direction is impossible. He is infinite. He has no limit. He's not confined. Muslim philosophers and Mu'tazilites say it is impossible to see God with eyes because God is mujarrad. Mujarrad is immaterial. It's not material. Not material, not physical, not corporal. So you cannot see him with physical eyes. Justice. God is perfect and justice is a perfection. Injustice is an imperfection. Therefore, God does not do injustice and is perfectly just. In fact, his oneness and absolute perfection indicate that he is just. And his justice indicates that he sends prophets and imams and that there is a promised day of judgment where all accounts, disputes, and injustices are settled, and so on will be settled. If we recall, in our earlier lessons, we said that justice is the second of our usul din, principles of religion. We said that the usul din are tawheed, justice, prophethood, nubuwah, imamate, and the day of judgment, mi'ad. So we said that all these are intellectually, it's an intellectual chain. It's an intellectual chain. So when you establish that God exists and that God is perfect, and establish that he is infinite and that he's perfect, then you establish that he has to be just because justice is a perfection. And since he is just and he created humans with free will, which is a good in itself, then to make choices between good and bad, then it's in his justice that he sends prophets to guide people to make the right choices, books to guide people to make the right choices, imams to guide people to make the right choices. And then it becomes within his justice that he has a day where he will settle the disputes, where he will reward the people who deserve the reward, where he will punish the people who deserve the punishment, where he will fix the things that people did wrong for what they did. This is all his justice. So these are intellectual chains. The intellect says all these things. We developed all these notions by the intellect here, by intellectual ideas. And the details of them, like the Day of Judgment, maybe some of those details are of the kind that we don't always have a rational argument for some of the things that will happen on the Day of Judgment or in the hereafter. But that's okay, because there is no intellectual argument against them. They're not irrational. They are the type of propositions and ideas that we just don't understand completely yet. Inshallah, one day we will. And maybe a person gets so close to Allah that he allows them the light of knowledge to be enhanced and more intense than others, and then they understand these things differently. Or maybe we'll have to wait till we get there to understand certain things. Like, but the fact is that the whole entire idea of there having to be a Day of Judgment is all rational and intellectual. It is all supported by intellect. The Day of Judgment, the Resurrection Day, the necessity of prophets, the necessity of imams, the necessity of God's justice and perfection and his tawheed is all intellectually established by intellect. Quran expresses these realities because there's hadith that says anyone who has intellect has religion, and anyone who has religion enters paradise. So we want to say that it's very important to understand that our beliefs, our fundamental beliefs in Islam, are all established by aql, intellect. They're all established by intellect. We're not like some people who just go and take an irrational leap into something that's irrational and just believe it because people say to believe it. No, we don't do that. We don't blindly follow. There's no taqleed in this section. We have to understand intellectually. Our belief in Allah and the Day of Judgment and the Prophets all has to be established intellectually. The successors, etc. So since that is the case, we have a logical foundation. Islam is the religion of logic and intellect, rationality. It's beautiful. It brings us towards, it's the religion of intellectual people. So we must understand that these beliefs are not fancy ideas. These beliefs are things that are established by strong, solid intellectual thought. Very smart people have come and analyzed and have determined that Islam is right. And these ideas are intellectual. So it's very important to understand that there are really strong intellectual arguments for our usul din. Even though maybe the details of like what may happen in the hellfire, since we don't experience it and it's a different level of existence or different world, different type of existence, more intense. So we can't always analyze it like we can other things, but we can establish it, and we can establish things about it as well. But maybe you come to some detail that you need to have patience with and wait for Allah to reveal it to you about it. But the whole fact of the Day of Judgment and the prophets and the imams and the justice of God and God's oneness is all established intellectually. So there has to be a day of judgment where Allah will punish and reward people. There has to be prophets here and books, and we have to listen. This is intellectual. And it is in God's justice, since God is perfect, and we establish, you've seen the arguments here in these classes, that God exists. Then we must establish God's existence with intellect. It's established with intellect. As you've seen, we establish it with intellect. Intellect does not deny it. Intellect affirms it and confirms that God exists. And it's His justice that we have to do these things. So where are we? We have to now follow. We've seen proofs. We need to obey and follow. We've seen some high notions, intellectual ideas about the law, intellectual arguments about the law, things that are not things that you could just throw away. No, these are strong ideas, strong arguments. Like the whole world is created in such a beautiful way that it has a design to it, and it indicates that there's a designer. So this is our lesson for today. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.